The grand ceremonial hall of Estrella Prime gleamed with polished obsidian floors that reflected the light of 3 moons. Hanging in the evening sky beyond the crystalline dome, diplomat Cassian Reed adjusted the collar of his formal Earth Alliance uniform, trying not to show his discomfort as he stood among the human delegation. The Australians, with their silver-blue skin and impressive height, most standing at least 7 feet tall, moved through the gathering with a fluid grace that belied their warrior heritage. "Remember," whispered Ambassador Holden at his side. "The Australians value strength and directness, but their honor codes are intricate. Watch, learn, then act." Cassian nodded, his attention drawn to the elaborate ritual unfolding before them. Warriors in ceremonial armor demonstrated complex battle formations around a raised central dais, their movements precise despite the weight of their regalia. The display was clearly meant to impress the human guests while showcasing Australian military prowess. "The female approaching the platform is General Thalia Venn," Holden continued under his breath. "She commands their 4th battle fleet, one of their most accomplished officers. The male beside her is Commander Drovis, her bonded mate." Cassian studied the pair as they took position for what appeared to be a formal presentation. General Venn carried herself with unmistakable military bearing, her silver-blue features composed and professional. Drovis, by contrast, radiated barely, contained tension, his hand resting on the ceremonial weapon at his side with practiced familiarity. The proceedings continued with formal speeches from various Australian officials, their translator devices rendering their melodic language into crisp, diplomatic standard. Cassian found himself observing the crowd's reactions rather than focusing on the words, trying to read the subtle dynamics that might influence the upcoming trade negotiations. That was when he noticed something troubling. It began with small. "Kuzi," the way Drovis's grip tightened on Ven's arm when she stepped forward to speak. The almost imperceptible flinch when he leaned close to whisper something in her ear. Cassian's years in conflict zones had taught him to recognize signs of coercion and abuse, and what he was witnessing made his jaw clench. When General Venn stepped onto the platform to address the assembled delegates, Drovis's whispered comment caused her to stumble briefly over her opening words. The mistake was minor, barely noticeable to most observers, but Drovis's reaction was immediate and harsh. His backhand struck Venn across the face with enough force to make her stagger, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent hall. Cassian moved before conscious thought could intervene, his body responding to years of training and deeply held principles. He vaulted onto the platform in one fluid motion, positioning himself between Venn and Drovis with his arms extended in a protective stance. "That's enough," he said firmly, his voice carrying through the hall's perfect acoustics. The silence that followed was absolute. Cassian became acutely aware of hundreds of Australian eyes fixed on him, and the dawning realization that he had likely committed a significant diplomatic breach. Drovis's expression shifted from surprise to outrage, his hand moving to his ceremonial blade. "Human," Drovis snarled, his translator rendering his words with mechanical precision. "You dare interfere in private matters between bonded mates?" "I interfere when I see someone being assaulted," Cassian replied, maintaining his protective stance despite Ambassador Holden's urgent hissing behind him. "Where I come from, striking your partner isn't a private matter." General Venn, still recovering from the blow, stared at Cassian with an expression he couldn't interpret. Was it shock? Warning? He couldn't tell, but he held his ground as Drovis drew his blade with deliberate ceremony. "You question my authority over my mate?" Drovis announced, his voice projecting to every corner of the hall. "You question the honor of my bloodline. By the ancient laws of combat, I demand satisfaction." Cassian felt his stomach sink as he realized the situation had escalated beyond a simple diplomatic incident. "I'm not questioning anything," he said carefully. "Just saying there are better ways to resolve disagreements." "The human speaks of better ways while insulting our traditions," Drovis continued, playing to the audience. "Perhaps he believes his soft species superior to ours. Perhaps he thinks himself capable of claiming what is mine. I don't want to." "Claim anything," Cassian said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. I just want everyone to maintain composure and discuss whatever the issue might be. Drovis's laugh was harsh and mocking, as the human refuses combat. He interferes where he has no right, then shows cowardice when challenged. Typical of a species too weak for true honor. Cassian felt heat rise in his face. He'd face down hostile negotiations and combat situations without flinching, but being called a coward in front of both delegations struck a nerve he couldn't ignore. Behind him, he heard Ambassador Holden's sharp intake of breath. "Fine," Cassian said, the word escaping. Before his diplomatic training could stop it, "If you want to fight, we'll fight. Win or lose, you don't hit her again." The crowd's reaction was immediate, a mixture of shocked murmurs and what sounded like approval. Drovis's smile revealed teeth that seemed sharper than human norm, and Cassian began to wonder exactly what he'd just agreed to. "The challenge is accepted," Drovis announced formally. "Combat will proceed according to traditional law. The winner claims all rights of the defeated." Cassian wanted to ask what exactly that meant, but attendants were already approaching with ceremonial weapons and light combat gear. As they fitted him with unfamiliar armor, he caught General Ven's gaze. Expression held something he hadn't expected, a flicker of hope, quickly masked by military professionalism. What had he gotten himself into? More importantly, what would happen if he lost? The ceremonial blade they presented to Cassian was heavier than he expected, its balance unfamiliar in his grip. The curved weapon glowed faintly along its edge, with what appeared to be some kind of energy field. Across the platform, Drovis shed his ornate outer garments in favor of lighter fighting gear, his movements confident and practiced. "Commander?" Ambassador Holden's voice reached him through the crowd noise, tight with concern. "You don't have to do this. We can invoke diplomatic immunity." "It's too late for that," Cassian replied, testing the weapon's weight with an experimental swing. "If I back down now, we lose all credibility with them." General Ven appeared at his side as attendants made final adjustments to his minimal protective gear. "Human," she said quietly, her voice still unsteady from Drovis's blow, "you do not understand what you have done." "I stopped someone from hitting you," Cassian said simply. "Everything else is just politics." "No," Ven said urgently. "It is not mere politics among my people. When a challenger defeats another in combat over Drovis's battle cry cut off." Whatever Ven had been about to explain, Cassian barely raised his blade in time to block Drovis's opening strike, the force of impact sending numbing vibrations up his arms. The Australian warrior was stronger, faster, and infinitely more skilled. With the ceremonial weapons, Cassian's only advantages were his Earth Special Forces training and the desperate knowledge that losing might mean more than personal humiliation. The combat arena had been hastily cleared in the center of the ceremonial hall, with delegates from both species forming a ring around the combatants. The Australians watched with expressions ranging from excitement to disapproval, while the human delegation looked on in horror at what could become a diplomatic catastrophe or worse, the death of one of their own. Drovis pressed his advantage, driving Cassian back with a series of powerful strikes. Each impact jarred Cassian's bones, but he focused on defensive maneuvers, studying his opponent's style. Drovis fought with technical precision, but obvious arrogance, clearly believing the match would end quickly. "You fight like a child," Drovis taunted, his blade slicing through the air inches from Cassian's face. "Defensive and weak. Is this how all humans face challenge?" Cassian didn't waste breath responding. Instead, he continued his strategic retreat, letting Drovis expend energy on flashy maneuvers meant to impress the audience. 3 minutes into the fight, Cassian spotted what he was waiting for, a pattern in Drovis's attacks. A slight overextension when executing a particular combination. When Drovis launched that sequence again, Cassian was ready. Rather than retreating, he stepped into the attack, ducking under Drovis's blade and using his lower center of gravity to his advantage. His shoulder rammed into Drovis's midsection, disrupting the Australian's balance just enough to create an opening. Cassian's counterattack was swift and precise. Not the powerful overhead strikes Drovis favored, but quick, targeted blows to vulnerable points. The ceremonial blade caught Drovis across his knee, then his sword arm, the energy field along the edge, ensuring the wounds were painful but not lethal. Dr. Ovu staggered, genuine surprise replacing his arrogant sneer. The Australian crowd fell, silent, clearly not expecting this turn of events. Drovis recovered quickly, launching a desperate offensive, but his movements had lost their precision. When he overcommitted to a particularly vicious strike, Cassian sidestepped and used the Australian's momentum against him. Drovis stumbled. Cassian's blade found an opening, and suddenly the proud Australian warrior was on his knees with the glowing edge at his throat. The hall fell silent except for the combatant's heavy breathing. Cassian stared down at his defeated opponent, hardly believing the outcome himself. "I yield," Cassian said finally, his voice rough with exertion. Drovis's eyes burned with humiliation, but after a moment he nodded stiffly. "I yield." Cassian stepped back, lowering his weapon, and looked around for some indication of what should happen next. What he saw in the faces surrounding him wasn't relief or congratulation, but something that looked disturbingly like awe, mixed with concern. His gaze found General Ven, still standing where the attendants had left her, staring at him with an expression of absolute shock. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the silence. "By the ancient laws of combat," she said formally, her words seeming to cost her great effort, "I belong to you now." Cassian felt the ceremonial blade slip from suddenly nerveless fingers as the implications of what he'd unknowingly done began to sink in. Around them, the assembled Australians began to murmur in their native language, the translator devices rendering fragments that included words like binding, ownership, and claim right. "I belong to you," Ven repeated, her military bearing intact despite the tremor in her voice. "According to the laws our people have honored for 1,000 generations." Cassian stared at her, his mind struggling to process what she was telling him. He had intervened to stop abuse and somehow ended up accidentally claiming ownership of another sentient being. Behind him, he could hear Ambassador Holden's urgent whispers as the diplomatic staff tried to figure out how to handle this unprecedented situation. "I don't want to own anyone," Cassian said finally, his voice barely audible in the vast hall. "What you want," said an elderly Australian who stepped forward from the crowd, "is less important than what the law demands."
Oh.
The combat was witnessed. The victory cleared, the claim established. "The female is yours by right of conquest, human. The ancient ways have spoken." Cassian's diplomatic quarters had never felt more confining than they did with General Ven standing rigidly by the viewport. Gazing out at Estrella Prime's gleaming cityscape, the last hour had been a blur of confused explanations, urgent consultations with legal experts, and the growing realization that he'd stumbled into something far more complex than a cultural misunderstanding. "So let me understand this clearly," Cassian said, reviewing the data tablet containing hastily translated Australian legal codes. "By defeating Drovis in combat, I've automatically acquired all his legal rights regarding you, including something called bond dominion that essentially makes you my property under Australian law?" "That is correct," Ven replied without turning from the viewport, her voice carefully neutral. "The right of conquest is one of our oldest traditions. When a challenger defeats another in formal combat over a bonded mate, the victor gains all rights previously held by the defeated. There's no way to simply decline this ... arrangement?" Cassian asked. "Not without bringing dishonor to both of us, and potentially sparking a diplomatic incident that could affect relations between our species for generations," Ben said with what might have been bitter humor. "The law exists to prevent endless cycles of violence over mates. Once combat is concluded and witnessed, the matter is considered settled permanently." Cassian set down the tablet and studied Ven's tense posture. "What happens if I refuse to acknowledge the law?" "Then I become unclaimed property in the eyes of my people," Ven said, finally turning to face him. "Drovis's family could petition to reclaim me, or I could be assigned to another warrior at the discretion of the clan elders. Either way, I lose what little autonomy I had before." "That's barbaric," Cassian said flatly. "It's tradition," Ven corrected, though her tone suggested she didn't entirely disagree with his assessment. "And tradition has the force of law among my people, regardless of how progressive we claim to be in interstellar affairs." Cassian studied her face, trying to read the emotions she was working so hard to conceal. "You said what little autonomy I had before. What was your situation with Drovis?" Ven was quiet for a long moment. A political arrangement formalized when I was newly commissioned. Drovis needed a mate with military connections to advance his position, and my family needed the alliance his clan offered. She touched the fading mark on her cheek where Drovis had struck her. I had hoped that achieving rank and distinction might give me some measure of independence, but Australian law is clear about the hierarchy of authority in a bonding. He hit you regularly, Cassian said, making it a statement rather than a question. When he felt I had overstepped my place or embarrassed him in some way, Ven confirmed, which was increasingly often as I advanced in rank and began expressing strategic opinions he found, inconvenient. Cassian felt anger flare again at the casual way she described the abuse. No one intervened. Why would they? A bondholder has the right to discipline his mate as he sees fit, provided he doesn't cause permanent injury. Ven's laugh held no humor. Your intervention today was the first time anyone has ever stepped between us during such an incident. I couldn't just stand there and watch, Cassian said simply. No, Ven replied, and for the first time, since entering his quarters, her expression softened slightly. That is what makes this situation so complicated. Cassian leaned back in his chair, trying to process the impossible position they both found themselves in. Explain it to me. What exactly does this law say I can and cannot do? Ven moved away from the viewport and settled into a chair across from him, her military training evident in her precise posture. As my owner under the right of conquest, you have absolute authority over my actions, my property, my body, and my future. I cannot make any significant decisions without your permission, cannot enter into agreements, cannot even refuse your physical demands. Cassian felt sick. That's slavery. It's marriage under Australian law, Ven corrected. The terms are essentially the same, but the cultural framework is different. A bondholder has responsibilities as well as rights to provide for, protect, and care for his property. Don't call yourself property, Cassian said sharply. Ven's eyebrows rose. But that is what I am now. Under the law, you are bound to honor if you wish to maintain diplomatic relations with my people. Cassian stood abruptly and began pacing, his frustration evident. There has to be some loophole, some way around this that doesn't leave you worse off than before. Perhaps, Ven said thoughtfully, but finding it will require understanding why the law exists in the first place. Enlighten me, Cassian said, still pacing. Australian society has always been hierarchical and militaristic. Historically, conflicts over mates could tear apart clans and lead to generations of blood feuds. Ven spoke with the tone of someone reciting academic material. The combat law was created to channel that violence into controlled witness contests that would settle disputes permanently and publicly. So it's basically trial by combat for marriage rights, Cassian summarized. The theory was that the strongest warrior would prove most capable of protecting and providing for the mate, while the ritualized nature of the combat would prevent larger conflicts. Cassian stopped pacing and looked at her directly. Do you believe that theory? I believe it made sense when my people were scattered across hostile frontier worlds. And physical strength determined survival, Ven said carefully. I'm less convinced of its relevance in an interstellar society where diplomatic and intellectual capabilities matter more than combat prowess. But you're stuck with it anyway. We are both stuck with it, Ven corrected, unless we can find a solution that satisfies both the law and our principles. 3 weeks into their unconventional arrangement, Cassian had learned that General Venthalia, she'd asked him to call her, privately possessed a strategic mind that rivaled any Earth Alliance officer he'd served with. A dry sense of humor that emerged when she felt secure, and absolutely no patience for the stream of Australian officials who kept arriving to verify proper bond management protocols. He'd also discovered that sharing living quarters with someone technically classified as his property created awkward situations that no diplomatic manual had prepared him for. The High Council has requested another inspection, Thalia announced, reviewing the morning's official correspondence while Cassian attempted to master the art of preparing Earth coffee using Australian kitchen technology. Apparently there are concerns about your unorthodox approach to bond supervision? Let me guess, Cassian said, finally coaxing something resembling coffee from the alien brewing apparatus. Someone reported that I let you attend strategy meetings without permission, or that you've been expressing opinions in public, or some other shocking violation of their property management standards. Actually, this time they're concerned because several witnesses reported seeing us laugh together during yesterday's trade negotiations, Thalia said with obvious amusement. Excessive familiarity between owner and owned is apparently considered undignified for all parties involved. Cassian set down his cup with more force than necessary. These people have opinions about everything, don't they? Welcome to Australian society, Thalia replied cheerfully. We've elevated social micromanagement to an art form, though I have to admit, watching you navigate our bureaucratic maze has been educational. Most humans would have given up by now. The day is still young, Cassian muttered, then immediately looked apologetic. Sorry, I don't mean to take my frustration out on you. It's refreshing, actually, Thalia said, surprising him. Drovis would have blamed me for creating this situation in the first place, then used it as justification for some new restriction on my activities. Cassian studied her expression, noting how she now spoke about her former mate with detached analysis. Rather than emotion, can I ask you something personal? You've been sleeping on the floor for 3 weeks to give me the bedroom. Thalia's tone was teasing rather than bitter. I think we're past the point of formality. Are you happy? Cassian asked simply. I mean, with how things are now compared to before? Thalia set down her datapad, considering the question with the same focus she applied to military strategy. I'm less unhappy. I have more freedom in daily decisions, more respect for my professional expertise, and less fear of physical reprisal. But I still exist within a system that defines me as property, and now I've dragged you into it as well. Before Cassian could respond, their quarters communication system chimed with an official alert. Diplomat Reed, came the formal voice of Ambassador Holden. The Australian High Council has convened an emergency session. Regarding your ... set situation, your presence is required immediately. General Venn is to accompany you. The High Council chamber was a vast circular room dominated by a horseshoe-shaped table where 9 Australian elders sat in ornate chairs. The chamber's high ceiling was decorated with what appeared to be battle scenes from Australian history. An armed honor guard stood at regular intervals around the perimeter. Cassian and Thalia stood at the focal point of the council's attention, the eyes of every elder fixed on them with varying degrees of disapproval. This unprecedented situation cannot continue, announced Elder Protos, the white-haired leader of the traditional faction. A human cannot properly exercise bond rights over an Australian general. It violates natural order and undermines our most sacred traditions. With respect, Elder Cassian replied, the combat was conducted according to your laws, and the outcome was witnessed by hundreds. Were you suggesting your own laws should not be honored? Murmurs circulated among the council members at this direct challenge. Elder Protos' face darkened. The law must be honored, countered Elder Celine, one of the few female council members, but interpretation of the law falls to this council. We must consider whether a human can comprehend the responsibilities of Australian bond rights. Perhaps, suggested Ambassador Holden from his observer's position. This situation presents an opportunity to reconsider whether such laws remain appropriate for an interstellar society. Our traditions are not subject to foreign judgment, snapped Protos. This council has authority to dissolve improper bonds and reassign rights to appropriate parties. Drovis's clan has petitioned for restoration of their family claim. Thalia stepped forward, her military bearing impeccable. I request the right to speak. The council chamber fell silent. Such a request from a bonded female was clearly unusual. You may speak, General Vin, Elder Celine said before Protos could object. Under traditional law, the quality of bond management is judged by the condition of the property, Thalia said, her voice strong and clear. I stand before this council healthier, more effective in my military duties, better respected than at any time during my previous bond. By the standards of our own law, Diplomat Reed has proven himself a more suitable bondholder than Drovis. A human cannot understand our ways, Protos insisted. Yet he honors them, Thalia countered. He has studied our laws, respected our customs, and upheld his responsibilities while allowing me to serve Estrella, as I was trained to do. If the purpose of bond law is to ensure proper care and protection, then by objective measure, this arrangement fulfills that purpose. Cassian watched the council members exchange glances, sensing division in their ranks. He stepped forward to stand beside Talia, shoulder to shoulder. "Honorable Council," he said formally, "I did not seek this position, but I accept its responsibilities. If your concern is that I might dishonor your traditions through ignorance, I propose a probationary period during which I can demonstrate my commitment to understanding and respecting Australian bond law." A new voice entered the discussion, Elder Taris, known as a moderate who rarely spoke at public sessions. "There's precedent for such an arrangement," Taris said thoughtfully. "In the days of expansion, when clan boundaries were redrawn, probationary periods were sometimes granted to new bondholders from different territories. That was between Australians," Protos objected. "The law does not specify species," Elder Selene pointed out. "It speaks only of combatants and rights." For the next hour, the council debated while Cassian and Thalia stood silently, their posture never wavering. Finally, Elder Selene addressed them directly. "This council has reached a decision. Diplomat Reed will be granted a probationary period of 1 orbital cycle to demonstrate fitness as a bondholder. During this time, General Ven will continue. Her military duties in both parties will be subject to regular assessment by council representatives." As they left the chamber, Ambassador Holden caught up with them in the corridor. "You've bought time," he said quietly, "but the traditionalists won't give up so easily. They see this situation as a threat to their entire social structure." "Right," Thalia said with unexpected firmness. "It is." Cassian sat cross-legged on the floor of their shared quarters, surrounded by ancient Australian legal texts that had been translated into standard. For the past 3 hours, he had been searching for anything that might offer a permanent solution to their increasingly complex situation. The probationary period granted by the High Council was halfway complete. And while they had passed every formal assessment, the political pressure was intensifying. Drovas's clan had filed 3 formal petitions challenging Cassian's fitness. As a bondholder, conservative military officials had begun questioning whether Thalia should retain her command position while under foreign influence. "Any progress?" Thalia asked, entering the room after her shift at the Australian Defense Command. "Maybe," Cassian said, looking up from the texts. "I've been focusing on the wrong question. Instead of looking for ways to invalidate the bond, I should have been researching how bonds can be transformed." Thalia settled beside him, her interest piqued. "Transformed how?" "There's a provision in the ancient covenants, the pre-space flight legal codes for something called ascension of bond." Cassian indicated a passage in one of the oldest texts. "It describes a process where a bond based on conquest can be elevated to a partnership of equals if certain conditions are met." Talia leaned closer, her expression skeptical as she examined the text. "This hasn't been invoked in centuries. The last recorded case was during the Third Clan Wars, long before my people achieved unified government. But it was never removed from the legal code," Cassian pointed out. "And according to your legal experts, ancient covenant law supersedes modern interpretation when directly cited." "The conditions would be nearly impossible to meet," Talia said, scanning the requirements. "The bondholder must publicly renounce conquest rights. The bonded must demonstrate equal contribution to the partnership, and both must complete the ritual of shared purpose." "What exactly is that ritual?" Cassian asked. Talia shook her head. "I'm not certain. These ancient ceremonies aren't part of modern education. We'd need to consult a keeper of ways, one of our cultural historians." 2 days later, they stood before Elder Namara, one of the oldest living keepers of ways, in her sanctuary at the edge of the capital city. The ancient Australian skin had faded from silver blue to a pale lavender with age, and her movements were slow but deliberate as she examined the texts they had brought. "The ritual of shared purpose," she said, her voice surprisingly strong, "was designed to ensure that neither party could deceive the other about their intentions. It involves a psychic joining through the stellar chalisa, a device that links the participant's consciousness temporarily." "Is such a device still available?" Cassian asked. "I am its custodian," Namara replied. But I must warn you, joining cannot be faked or manipulated. If your intentions are not genuinely aligned, the ritual will fail, and traditional bondholders will have grounds to claim the female. Cassian and Thalia exchanged glances. We're willing to take that risk, Cassian said. Are you certain? Namara asked, looking directly at Thalia. This human cannot possibly understand the depth of what you propose. The ritual reveals all fears, hopes, true intentions. I trust him, Thalia said simply. The day of the ritual arrived with unexpectedly high interest from both Australian and human delegations. Word had spread about the ancient ceremony, and the High Council had declared it would be witnessed formally to ensure compliance with tradition. The ceremonial hall, the same space where Cassian had first intervened weeks ago, was filled to capacity. The stellar chalice sat on a raised platform at the center, an ancient device that glowed with soft blue light. Elder Namara stood beside it, her ceremonial robes flowing around her diminutive form. Those who seek ascension of bond step forward, she intoned. Cassian and Thalia approached the platform together. Namara instructed them to stand on opposite sides of the chalice and place their hands into the light. Speak your intentions clearly, she said. The chalice will judge there. Truth Cassian took a deep breath. I, Cassian Reed, renounce all rights of conquest over Thalia Ven. I seek not ownership, but partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. The blue light pulsed, spreading up his arms in spiraling patterns. Cassian felt a strange sensation. If his thoughts were suddenly expanding beyond the confines of his own mind, Thalia Ven, she said clearly, claim my place as equal partner too. Cassian Reed, I offer not submission but alliance based on trust and common goals. The light between them intensified, connecting their hands with threads of energy. Cassian gasped as he felt Thalia's consciousness touch his own, not with words, but with impressions, emotions, and core truths that could not be hidden or falsified. He sensed her initial fear when he had challenged Drovis, her shock at his victory, her cautious hope as she came to know him, and finally her genuine respect and growing affection. In return, he knew she was experiencing his impulsive desire to protect, his horror at realizing the implications of his victory, his determination to find a solution, and his deepening commitment to her well-being and autonomy. Brilliantly, then settled into a steady glow that encircled both of them. The chalice accepts your truth, Elder Namara announced, her voice carrying throughout the hall. By the power of the ancient covenants, this bond is transformed. No longer conquest but covenant, no longer master and property, but partners bound by choice. The pronouncement sent ripples of reaction through the audience. Ambassador Holden looked relieved, while Elder Protos and his traditionalist faction appeared outraged. Elder Celine and the moderates watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to cautious approval. This is unprecedented, Protos declared, stepping forward. A human cannot enter into a covenant bond with an Australian. It violates natural order. The chalice is judged, Namara replied, her ancient authority silencing even Protos's objections. Its wisdom predates our written laws. Would you question the very foundation of our traditions, Elder? Protos fell silent, though his expression promised future challenges. As the ceremonial hall emptied, Cassian and Thalia remained on the platform, the lingering effects of the joining leaving them both quiet and thoughtful. Did you mean what I sensed? Thalia asked finally. About being committed to my autonomy, even if it complicated your diplomatic mission? Yes, Cassian said simply. Did you mean what I sensed about being willing to help bridge our cultures, even if it meant challenging your own people's traditions? Yes, she replied with equal directness. Ambassador Holden approached them, looking both impressed and concerned. You realize you've just created a diplomatic situation that has no precedent in Earth's alliance history? The legal implications alone will keep our experts busy for years. Sometimes, Cassian said, looking at Thalia, new situations require new solutions. What we've done here isn't just about us. It's about creating a template for how different cultures can honor each other's traditions while still evolving together. The covenant bond has requirements, Thalia reminded him with a slight smile. Equal partnership, shared purpose, mutual support. "Those sound like good principles for interspecies relations in general," Cassian replied. As they left the ceremonial hall together, neither property nor owner but partners by choice, they knew that challenges remained. Traditionalists would resist, bureaucrats would complicate, and both their cultures would struggle to categorize what they had created. But in that moment, walking side by side, rather than one following the other, they had established something unprecedented, a new way forward that honored the past while creating possibility for the future. Perhaps Cassian thought that was what diplomacy was truly meant to accomplish.